Welcome to Techno Masterclass. I am ECHOPLEX, also known as Postscriptum. Today is 2nd February 2020, and I'm launching something very important to me. A project I never done before. I will not reveal the name of the album yet, nor I'll give you the name of the tracks. However, these are ready. Because the way I like to record albums personally is to have the names ready and to have the concept before I even start making the music. This is very important because it gives me the direction and the inspiration, and it drives towards the end goal, which is to complete and release the album. What I usually do is I come up with names of the tracks before I even sit in the studio. I usually take a piece of paper, think of an interesting concept or something that strikes me, and write names that kind of resonate with this idea. 12 tracks on this album, potentially more, however I would like to limit myself to 12. The deadline of this album is April. However, this can shift, as you can understand, for whatever reason, but I'll do my best to make sure that it's delivered within this period of time. Everything is connected and it doesn't interfere with the flow of your process, so you can just involve yourself into the making of the album or making of the music. I'm going to be using APS Eons 2 with subwoofers as you see them in the back. It's very exciting because APS was kind enough to send this pair of beautiful speakers to be involved in the album, and you will soon hear the sound that's coming through them. The main DAW that we're going to be running is Ableton Live, as well as Pro Tools down the line when we get to the stage of mixing and mastering. The sound card that I'm running, Apollo 16 with 16 ins and outs. An Onyx 1640. I particularly like this mixer because of the warmth of the analog sound. It gives you limitations though, because my versions, first of all, doesn't have the Firewire option, which lets you throw 16 channels straight into your DAW. What is also very limiting is that I cannot record separately all the channels at once, because the signal that's coming out of the mixer is pre-fader. Any movement of the fader, any affection of the knobs are not going to be recorded. So what's the point of running any external effects and things? And throughout the process, we're actually going to modify this mixer, and you will see how that is done. I'm using Oyada Electronics cables that are not only looking quite beautiful and green and white and fresh, they sound great, and also, what is the most important thing, is that whenever I play and gig with these cables, using these cables, even when they bend and even when I'm tired and wrapping up after a live PA and things like that, they still remain exactly the same. How many cables that I brought into gigs and they were broken after one gig? Now there's a particular reason why I'm using PATCHBAY. It's because I've only have 16 inputs on my mixer. You can probably imagine that I have a bit more than 16 channels running in this room. From the left-hand side of the mixer, I have connected all the devices and instruments that have either built-in sequencers or somehow they're able to make quick lines. So these included drum machines, synthesizers with onboard sequencers, new synthesizers with sequencers that can be synced up to DAW, synced up via USB MIDI. I have 10 channels of these. I have a 909, 808, 606, 303, 202, 101, TEMPEST, MINILOGUE, MODULAR. It's a small modular system as you see in the background. I'm not a big fan of modular equipment just because I think it's very expensive, and you can get a lot of this kind of sound from DAW, from things like Reactor Instruments and Cherry Audio and other beautiful things that have been invented over the years. However, I have this pure modular thing sitting in the back, as you could see, along with the Korg PS3100, which is a polyphonic modular sound system that I already told you about, so I'm not going to tell you the story again. Those are the only modular things that I'm going to be using in this project. All the signals are going to the Mackie, and from the Mackie they're going to the Apollo, and from the Apollo obviously they're going to the computer. I prefer to use the Apollo 16 just because it doesn't give me a lot of latency. Actually, there's non-latency, which is amazing when you're trying to quickly record your instruments into DAW. While running a big session, for example, let's say you're already quite developed into your track and you just want to add certain instruments. Usually what happens in Ableton Live when you're using different sound cards is when you're running a lot of latency problems. You keep your buffer size very minimal, and what that does, it basically, just freezes your session. You cannot do anything. So in this case, the Apollo does an amazing job. I don't use any plugins of the Apollo that are available for purchase, obviously. I just use the standard, and I love the sound of it. In the control surface, we have an ARTURIA KEYLAB 88. Now this is a weighted keys keyboard, which I particularly like because it allows me to play a lot of melodic things into the music, pads, strings, and things like that that you normally wouldn't really enjoy doing with a mouse, to be honest. I have the BeatStep Pro, the Chord Bot, the Launch Control, and ALESIS MT8. I'm using a USB hub that connects all the MIDI USB devices. I also have a ALESIS MT8 that's not connected to any MIDI clock. It just gives me a lot of opportunities to come up with quick lines, loops, and things that are quite inspirational that don't have to be synced up to any DAW. I also have external sound sources, and what I mean about that, I have the Tascam Multi-Tracker cassette recorder and player. I have a DAT, a mini disc, and a cassette deck. For those of you, DAT is a digital audio tape. It's been used in the 90s a lot. I just like the sound of it. It's a bit different than the CD, as well as generally sound coming from DAW. So just to add a lot of color, I will be recording things into DAT and then dropping that back into the computer. Same goes for the cassette, because I can do some really cool stuff with the pitch. I can pitch down certain sounds to create a lot of crunchy, saturated, analog, noisy stuff. I'm using the H9 Max by Eventide. This is a very important piece. It's actually controlled by via an iPad. It's very handy because the H9 Max could be somewhere not even visible, but you get to access all the parameters as if you were just tweaking the pedal. The H9 Max has all the pedals in one device, in one box. And every time there's a new one coming, it just simply upgrades for free. So I do recommend the H9 Max for those of you who are really interested in effects that are not typical to techno music, very much used by bands, for guitars especially. However, I like to use these effects for synthesizers and for really weird kind of filtery and noisy pads and things that you will hear. Apart from that, there's a Digitech TSR-24, which is probably the signature, and I mean signature sound of ECHOPLEX. And Digital Princess as well, because for those of you that know me from Poland, I've been also known for a very controversial project, Digital Princess on Mosquito Records, on Dave Tarida, Trezor compilations and things like that. But it just has this kind of weird algorithms that you could tweak, and it gives you a lot of really interesting. It's a multi-effects unit and a stereo unit, so it's connected to a stereo auxiliary sends into my Mackie. Two other effects units that I use is a digital reverberator Rev 7 by Yamaha. Now this is an interesting unit, although it's a quite simple reverb. It's MIDI, so you can sync up a lot of stuff through via MIDI, and a high-pass filter, which is quite interesting because you can filter out a lot of reverb. It's very useful for recording snare drums, for example, or processing snare drums through it, because it allows me for that control without overwhelming the mix. What you also see in this rack, it's a shitload of samplers that I have. There's an Akai S950, which is very important. There's also an Oberheim Matrix 6 that I use on probably every Soleil record. There's a S612 by Akai, which was probably used on every Purpose Maker by Jeff Mills. And also this quite funky little filter unit that it's Ian Pooley's secret weapon. I love it particularly actually using it on the Matrix. Now, what do I mean about that? The Matrix stereo output is connected to the filter Akai for one particular reason, because the Oberheim Matrix does not allow you to easily tweak things because it doesn't have any knobs. It only has what we'll call like numeric keypads that you can kind of go up and down with value to, so you can understand that I cannot tweak two things at once. Whereas if I process this through the filter box, for those of you who have racks that do not have any filters, now this is very useful because you can run in the resonance with one hand and cut off with the other, or LFO or whatever you want, and you can get a lot of really cool kind of live modification or let's say jam to it. The PATCHBAY, I'm using a Samson PATCHBAY. Is just a PATCHBAY. I mean, any PATCHBAY will do, really. What I like to do is that I have the signals plugged in the background of the PATCHBAY, and then I have these cables here in the front, which allow me to basically quickly plug things in. So the way this is connected is that there's a stereo channel that's going into the Mackie channels 15, 16. And so, for example, if I want the MIDI disc, that's right now running from the MIDI disc. If I want, say, DAT, it comes out of that signal. If I want any other instrument, I can just swap. It's very easy that way, and I don't have to have another mixer to connect things. I can literally call up anything really quickly and record it if I want to. Especially those things that are on my right-hand side. There's plenty of vintage big keyboards that are quite up high that I have no access to it so easily, to just switching the cables back and forth. The USB hub connects to Arturia BeatStep Pro, which then plays a big role because it actually, first of all, it triggers the electronic drums by Simmons here. So I could tweak any sound if I want a tom sound, if I want a snarey sound or kick kind of sound. So Vermona does the same thing. These are like drum triggers that you can use. Now what the Arturia does as well is that it CV gates to the Korg PS3100, so I can actually play a sequence on the Arturia. I will let you hear that one day when we are making this album. There's also a trigger clock to the Pure Modular that's on the top of the Korg. So basically everything is kind of synchronized to the DAW, as the Arturia BeatStep Pro is synchronized to the DAW, as you can understand. There's also a Sync 24, which is quite important. Now Sync 24, it's a different kind of trigger. I used on those old boxes by Roland. So for example, the MC202, the 909, the 101, the 606, the 303. So the way that works is that I'm running two outputs out of the Arturia BeatStep Pro, but I mentioned already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items, including the 808. So I only have two triggers, so you probably wonder, how am I going to synchronize the rest? I'm using a U-Control device, which is really cool, kind of old school fader MIDI USB device, but I use it for clock because it's very powerful and it's very solid. And you want solid items when you're synchronizing external things like Sync 24. Now what I use to do that is that it obviously gives me a MIDI out. So I need a MIDI to Sync 24 converter. And I use this Australian box that's quite funky. It has 3 outputs, 3 Sync 24 outputs, and that goes into Believe it or not, it goes to the 909 because I just like the way it synchronizes. It's so nice and solid. It goes to the MC202 and it goes to the 303. The MC202 is also quite interesting because it has two Sync24 outputs. It has the input, which is running through the box, the Australian box I was telling you about. But what's cool is that it has two sync outs, which then go into the two remaining boxes, the TR-808 and the TR-606. Now back in the day when I had a bit more gear, imagine that. I had the CS10, I had the ARPs and things like that. I would then send trigger outputs from like a 909 and the 606 to synchronize other devices that had onboard sequencers. So what I do now, and with that respect, is that the 909 sends a trigger out, which is the rimshot sound, sends that to the SH101 external clock in, which lets me synchronize the sequencer that's built into the lovely SH101. Now the reason why I'm using the 909, not any other things, to trigger that is just because it allows me to shuffle. Now what's interesting is that the trigger, because it's sent out from the rimshot sound, it sends a shuffle control to the SH101. So you can imagine how the 909, which is a shuffly rhythm, let's say, set to like 3 or 5 on the shuffle range, can then synchronize with the SH101, and the SH101 gets that shuffle. So this is how Technofunk comes alive, okay? This is a modified SH101. I can send you some pictures if you want to know any more about the modification. It's been customized, and it has a Mach filter, as well as overdrive, the triangle waveform, the FM source, and audio input level, which is quite interesting because I can run things into it. So for example, I can run the SH101 back into its input, which will then self-oscillate the machine and will create a lot of freaky noise that I love. Okay. Another thing that's synchronized, it's a Tempest, just running from the MIDI USB hub. It's quite funky machine. I don't have a lot of digital equipment like that, but this one is good, especially for live performance. Most importantly, for every pattern you can have different set of sounds, which is quite nice because it gives you that flexibility, and it's quite analog sounding because it has an analog oscillator as well as you can mix in a digital waveforms into it, so you can create a lot of crunchy stuff. Dave Smith, for those of you who don't know who Dave Smith is, go on Techno Masterclass. We will have some videos of Dave Smith, a legendary synth maker. I've been making Prophets. I actually have a sequential circuits unit that I use that I really love. It's a 6-track, very nice for ambient things that we're going to be using as well, which is here down in the bottom. ALESIS MMT8. All I need is just to be able to trigger the sounds from the Akai samplers on my left-hand side. So the way it's set up is that ALESIS MMT8, it's MIDI in, MIDI out into the VFX and Sonic. Then the ALESIS MMT8 with a long MIDI cable that goes all across this room, goes to the other side of the room and connects to the Akai input MIDI, and then Akai connects in through to the Oberheim input, and then the Oberheim goes to the Akai S612. So that's the way MIDI is connected. So basically by recalling a MIDI channel, say MIDI channel 1, I could play the Akai. MIDI channel 2, I can play the Oberheim. MIDI channel 3, I can play the Akai S612. Before I sign off today, I like to encourage you guys to send me questions. Anything you want to ask in regards to this album making, to the process, to the way things are connected, anything is highly appreciated. And I will create a special session, a special video where I will answer all your questions very thoroughly and in a lot of details, as much detail as I can give you in terms of my knowledge. Because like I said, there will be no secrets, so I can reveal anything you would like to hear when it comes to music, techno. Also, it would be great if you guys share this video. If you liked it, comment on it. Also subscribe to our channel because it's important for the growth and for the making of this process. I like you to get involved, and And I'm really looking forward to the next video and having you guys on board with some questions, with some comments, and come on, let's push this together. That's it. Thank you very much. ECHOPLEX.